Let's transition to then what is coming up, because we know Amazon is going to pull out every dirty trick in the book to try to reverse these results, to try to make sure that these workers never actually win a contract, to make sure that this is the one and only warehouse that ever unionizes in the entire country. So let's put up Amazon's little response here. They're kind of going full stop the steal, Saagar. This is the commentary. They say Amazon getting about as close as it can to claiming the union election was rigged. Let's put their statement up on the screen here. They say, I'm going to read this in full, guys, so leave this up for a minute. They say, we're disappointed with the outcome of the election in Staten Island, I'm sure you are, because we believe having a direct relationship with the company is best for our employees. We're evaluating our options, including filing objections based on the, and this is the key part, based on the, quote, inappropriate and undue influence by the NLRB that we and others, including the National Retail Federation and U.S. Chamber of Commerce, witnessed in this election. First of all, those are two groups that are consultants for Amazon, so these aren't like separate independent entities, and they're also extremely anti-union. But when you're talking about, when you're alleging that the NLRB basically rigged this process, that's the governing body that oversees these elections. So that's setting up a potential court challenge and possibly signaling that they are going to go to the mat to try to ultimately reverse these results. So this is pretty wild that this is what they're putting out in their statement.
It's very characteristic of Amazon. I mean, I've read a lot about Amazon, the history of Amazon. Something that Bezos baked into the DNA was taking on regulatory, any regulatory capture industry relentlessly in terms of using Amazon's lawyers. So at the previous times in the 1990s up until the early 2000s, Bezos would use his entire legal infrastructure to challenge on sales tax. They do not want to collect online sales tax, all of that. They went so far as to set up separate entities in states where they did collect and require online sales tax and did not allow them to use Amazon.com emails and any other stuff.
Wow.
I'm just trying to show people that within the DNA of Amazon.com is the complete declaration of war against any regulatory, impetus on top of it. And when you're a scrappy little startup selling books in 1998, I get it. Whenever you're the second largest company on planet Earth, especially in terms of employment in America, it's a little bit of a different story. And I think that is why they're going to do this. I've noticed this with Bezos, period. What he does is he uses the court system and his political connections in order to try and rig the game in his favor. He's doing that right now with Blue Origin and his spaceship. Don't worry, that is actually still alive. And unfortunately, that's very likely to be the tactic here, because one of the things that we've pointed to is that, sure, the NLRB in this case is going to be a lot more friendly to Amazon, but they can mire this thing in legal fees and in the courts for years to come, leaving things up in the air, demoralizing the current effort at the unions, and also showing the workforce, like, yeah, you can vote. It doesn't matter. We will destroy you if we have the ability.
There is high turnover at these warehouses,
That's a good point
which,
too.
by the way, is partly by design by Amazon. I mean, they chew these workers up and they spit them out as fast as they possibly can. There's a couple things that are in the workers' favor, because one thing that we talked about on the show before is winning the vote is just the first step in the battle. They have a long road ahead of them before they actually get a contract. Amazon Labor Union put out a statement demanding that Amazon, negotiate with them and start collective bargaining in early May. I wouldn't hold your breath on that one. And in fact, what we often see is that corporations, they don't have any legal requirement to really negotiate in good faith. So they drag their feet, they pretend like they're negotiating, but they continually put poison pills into the contract so that you can never actually reach a contract agreement. So that's the next big fight for these workers that we're going to have to pay really close attention to. That and any sort of legal challenges that Amazon files about, how this election ultimately unfolded. A couple things that are going in their favor. Number one, we did learn that according to Amazon Labor Union, I think it was Derek Palmer who put this out, there are 18 other Amazon facilities across the country that have reached out to them that want to organize.
Wow.
So very much sounds like, what happened with Starbucks, where Buffalo just lit a fire across the country. And then you had all these workers seeing that example and saying, oh my God, like if they can do it, we could do it too. We could pull this off. Let's go, guys. So that, I think, is really important because I think the key strategy here has to be to strike while the iron is hot and to try to organize as many of these places as quickly as possible. The other tactic that companies often will use is they will just shutter the shop.
Right.
So we saw this, I think it was Dollar General in Missouri. A lot of companies will do this. And this is why workers are afraid to unionize, is the company will just say, all right, fine, we're just gonna close this place down.
Oh, it's not profitable anymore, even though it's been profitable for 25 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Amazon, they don't really have that luxury of doing that in New York City. If anything, they need more workers and they need more infrastructure in this region. You don't really have the, wiggle room to just close down. This is a gigantic facility with 8,000 workers and a key part of their distribution network in New York City and the surrounding areas. So that makes it a lot harder for them to just say, forget it, we're gonna write this one off and we're gonna go somewhere else.
Yeah.
So at least that gives the workers a little bit of leverage here.
I think that's right. And it's also just the irony of Amazon accusing the NLRB of rigging the election.
Please.
When the NLRB found that Amazon actually exerted undue influence on the Bessemer, Alabama election, resulting in a new election having to be held. That's really what this is all about. But it also goes to show you about the immense power of the National Retail, the NRF, and then also the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Both of those organizations here in Washington, they have two of the nicest buildings in the city. I'll put it that way. I think number one and number two in terms of
very telling.
Yeah, oh yeah. In terms of the lobbying power that these people is immense, and they are going to have to exert their influence both on the NLRB to try and rig some of the future findings about how this is going to happen. They're going to try and mire it within red tape. And really what you're seeing is that they are just showing you that they will declare all-out legal warfare on all of these elections in the future to discourage it. But the counter to that is that with the success of the Smalls effort, and if you can get, especially if we get one more store, because that's kind of how Starbucks started. Once they got two, it was like, okay, this is a thing.
Game
because
on.
then 2 became 6, and then 6 became like 18. I think that is very likely if they can get the second one in order to unionize, then it will spread. But of course, the real test too, it failed in Bessemer for a reason. And, New York, as you were saying, high union density. You have people there with a lot more familiar. They don't have as much. It's more of a sticky thing in terms of the warehouse. They know that Amazon can't just pull the plug on JFK. Like, what are you going to do? Not deliver to Amazon?
Right.
I mean, to New York City, you're going to do it. So here's the question. Can it work in Kansas City? Can it work in Nebraska? Can it work in Ohio? Can it work in Texas? I mean, these are all areas where that's going to be the true test.
That's the big question.
Yeah.
Because in Starbucks, the answer was yes. I mean, now we've had Starbucks kind of across the country that have voted to unionize, including places like Tennessee and, places that don't have that strong union culture. But Starbucks is obviously very different. I mean, we're talking about very small workforces versus thousands of workers. I do think the new redo election results in Bessemer are actually cause for encouragement, because right now, where things stand, the union is roughly 100 votes down in the new count. First of all, that is way better than they did the first time around when they lost something like 2/3 to 1/3. Shows you that, number one, the union just had more time to organize. The last one was done really in a rush and really in a hurry. So they probably had more time to build those local ties and have local worker organizers who had those relationships and were able to be more effective. Number two, it shows you the national landscape is very, very different. And by the way, there's over 400 ballots that have been challenged in that Bessemer election. So that one is not over yet. Even though the union is down in the count right now, there still is a glimmer of hope that once all of the challenges have been sorted through and resolved, that they could potentially, I think it's still a long shot, but could potentially end up on top. The very fact that it shifted so significantly that it could even be close this time around shows you what an extraordinarily different landscape this is now, and how workers are feeling a lot bolder about, about taking matters into their own hands. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.